everybody who's joining now. It'll take a couple minutes, but I think it would be best if everybody just kept their microphone off. If you want your video on, you can keep it on. And at the top of the screen, you'll see a little like checkerboard. If you click on that, it gives you the option of grid view or speaker view. And I think this will be better if you just keep it in speaker view. And it'll take a bit of time. There's still some people joining. I think I'll just keep adding them. And I'll probably repeat these housekeeping notes a couple times as people join, but just keep the microphone off. We're going to use the chat function to submit questions for Sudhanshu. And I just want everybody to know that the meeting is being recorded. It's a lot of participants today, still more people joining. So what I was thinking is that we'll just, we'll talk to Sudhanshu, and in the beginning, I'd just like to do a little introduction with him and talk about some general things that I know everybody's going to be interested in. And then I do welcome your questions. Best if you just submit the questions through the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And after we get through a little bit of interrogating Sudhanshu, then we'll start taking your questions. And yeah, so I've admitted everybody. There's some people still kind of dropping in, but we can go ahead and get started. Just a reminder, please do keep your microphone on mute, and everybody is muted by default. So unless you're playing around with that microphone, we should be good to go. Sudhanshu, always wonderful to talk to you, man.
Awesome, Prab. Yeah, I'm glad we're doing this.
It's going to be fun. So like I said, I think while we're waiting for people to join, maybe we can just get started off and, you know, understand your story a little bit. I know I've told this story a bunch over the years, and you have inspired many of our students. Tell us a little bit about, all right, so take us back to Magnolia and 11th and 12th.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, if anyone here has heard any parts of the story, a disclaimer, the story is better than the reality. So I'll be talking more about the reality today. But yeah, just a quick overview. I grew up in Bangalore. I was in NPS, which is kind of known as you know, a very academically focused school in the city, all the way until 10th grade. So that was a CBSE school. For 11th and 12th, I joined AECS Magnolia, which is a school that offered IIT coaching during school hours, and then ended up taking a gap year after 12th grade, and then attended MIT, where I did my bachelor's and master's. So that's kind of what the whole journey was. But I guess to answer your question, Prab, I think 10th grade, one day I find out that my friends are thinking about this thing called college, and they're taking these entrance tests for high schools for 11th and 12th. And it was really then that it hit me. I was like, wow, I haven't really thought about this at all. And when I went and spoke to my parents, I told them, hey, some of my close friends are going to this international school. Like, do you think I could go abroad for college? My parents said that it wouldn't make sense for the family financially unless I made it to one of the very best colleges. And so while that sounded exciting, the reality was I knew no one who had gotten into Harvard, MIT, Stanford, or whatnot. And so to me, it was always this dream that, oh, I might end up in college one day. What I thought was the more prudent and smart thing to do was balance my options. And that's kind of how I decided that I was going to join an IIT coaching school to keep my options in India open. And at the back of my mind, I thought that, okay, maybe I can pull together an application in the last moment and apply if that still seems like a good idea.
You know, if I can just interject, way back when I first started working with students in India, I did work with some students who were aiming for IIT and, you know, doing that coaching, and then they came to me because they wanted to apply to MIT and Stanford as their safety. You know? And And I did work with some students, but I found that it really didn't work. I mean, just the process of getting into those competitive schools in India and selective schools in the U.S. Was such a different process that they ended up kind of diluting both. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then also want to hear about, when you decided to apply to the U.S. that had to do with an injury that you had, and missing a lot of IIT coaching, and that's where I learned that missing a month of IIT coaching is like a decade in human years. So
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to your first question, Prab, I think in retrospect, I wouldn't recommend anyone to really gun for both dreams, because if it's a dream, chances are that it's hard to do. And the more you spread yourself, the smaller your chances are of actually getting there. So I think I know a lot of people who were able to kind of do both and get into good to okay schools in both cases. But if you're aiming for the very best, which is making it to an IIT or making it to one of the top colleges, I'd say it's generally not a smart idea to try to do both. I'd say there's only one exception that I know, which is there are some students who are so smart and so brilliant that they end up representing India for Olympiads. And there they end up literally using what they learned in IIT coaching, and then that Olympiad medal gets them to the colleges abroad. But you're talking about like 5 people every year. So
yeah.
definitely not something I would recommend.
Yeah, and everybody who's thinking that is going to think you're speaking right to them right now. I'm that guy. I could do that.
Yeah. If you're that guy because you would have been winning all these Olympiads all your life. So.
Right. Great. So just going to remind the room that I'm hoping that this is going to be nice and interactive. There's no silly questions. Please go ahead and submit your questions in the chat. In the meantime, I think I will ask Sudhanshu to talk a little bit. I thought broadly in terms of kind of admissions prep and, what his advice there is, and then also about success in college. And he didn't mention modestly that he actually got his BS and MS in 4 years at MIT. And I remember when I toured MIT, there was a ceremonial fire hose in one place. I remember. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was like this, anyway, the tour
really,
guide
I didn't
said,
get around campus enough.
that's how you finished in 4 years. But there was, the tour guide said that learning at MIT is like trying to take a sip of water from a fire hose. So interested in how you were successful at MIT, what advice you might have for students who are just starting off college or getting ready to go to college. So let's start with the admissions area. Now, I know when you first applied, you kind of made the rookie mistake of only applying to really ridiculously selective schools. What advice do you have about kind of having a balanced list? And, generally there's a misconception out there that, well, if they're hard to get into, if I apply to more of them, then I improve my chances. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think you definitely need to apply with a balanced approach where it's a mix of colleges that obviously are your dream colleges where you'd love to attend, but obviously colleges also where you think you have a great chance of getting in. So that way, at the very end, you at least have a couple of options that are there for you and you'd be happy to do. And I think Prab, answering your question of, I guess, how I ended up even applying abroad from IIT coaching. So the short version of the story was I started IIT coaching and it ended up being a lot more intense than I'd ever imagined. So every day for 10 to 12 hours, we were at school just doing physics, math, chemistry every single day. And while that was fun initially, my heart was never really in studying really hard just for one test to get into one college. I think, as silly as it sounds, I've never considered myself to be academic in that way. I was always interested more in building my own projects, and back then I had this dream of playing basketball. So a lot of my time actually went outside school, just trying to gun for the basketball team in Karnataka. I wanted to play for the state team. And it was really when I had this really unfortunate injury during my senior year. I ended up missing a month of school because I was bedridden. That's when I felt so far behind my IIT coaching that I realized that, okay, this IIT dream is not happening. And a lot of my friends at that point were applying abroad. So that's really when, senior year, I took my SATs for the first time. I said, okay, we're going to do this. And that's how I ended up applying. And like Prab said, I shot for the stars, and I got brutally rejected. So I actually got rejected from MIT, which was quite heartbreaking.
And many, many others. All right, I've still got some of my questions, but there are some questions rolling in, so I thought we could take a couple of those and knock them out of the way, and then come back to what I've got planned. So someone had asked, why did you choose to take a gap year? And what did you do during that year? Well, that could take about 30 minutes to answer, but why don't we start with the first part, because I remember you and I did have that conversation in March of your senior year when you were considering taking a gap year.
Yeah, so this is actually the story of how I met Prab. So I'd heard great things about Prab from some of my friends who had worked with him. And so I said, okay, if I'm getting brutally rejected everywhere, I better ask the expert what's wrong and if there's anything I can do about it. And so the reason I was thinking about my gap year was I kind of was looking at three options. I'd gotten into some engineering colleges in India. So that was one option. For example, NIT Surathkal is one of the colleges I'd gotten into. At the same time, although I'd gotten rejected from a lot of colleges in the US, I had gotten accepted to a few. One of them was UCLA. So I was considering maybe going there. And UCLA obviously is a fantastic school. And the last one was taking a gap year, where I felt, okay, can I give myself the best shot at potentially getting into my dream colleges? And that's kind of the lens at how I was looking at those three options. And I ended up meeting Prab for the first time. I think I sent him a pretty shabby email, and he was gracious enough to respond. And I still remember something that Prab told me that I truly believe in even today, which is, he said, if you are taking this gap year just to get into a better college, there's a good chance you're going to be disappointed and you're going to regret the decision for maybe the rest of your life. And the only reason he recommended you should take a gap year is if there are actually things that you want to do in that year that you would find valuable. So that regardless of how your college admissions turn out, that year in itself would be fulfilling. And so that's really what I thought about, which was, what are things that I wanted to do? And were those compelling enough for me to take a gap year to do them? And the answer was yes. I always dreamt of building my own products. These were things I would maintain a journal about. It's never something that I really got to do. In high school, all I was doing was studying in classes, but I knew that I wanted to learn more about research. I wanted to even further my basketball dreams a little bit more. And so it was kind of that calculus of, I want to work on projects. I want to try doing research. I want to play more basketball, and I maybe want to travel and see the world a little bit more. It felt like those were good reasons for me to take a gap year, because I knew that coming into college, those would actually prepare me to make more out of the college experience than I could have otherwise.
Yeah, that last part really resonates with me, because whenever I've had gap year students, I think they go into and I think this is really relevant for a lot of students this year who are considering that maybe I won't be able to go physically to a campus in the fall, and considering taking a gap year or a gap semester. So I know that you did give it a lot of thought. I remember, I specifically remember being a bit offended that you were considering not going to UCLA because you wanted to get into a better school, since I went to UCLA. But I remember you did give it a lot of thought. You took like a week, and we also talked about the FOMO that you might get, the fear of missing out, with all your other friends in college. And I remember even during the year, you had a bit of that, it was kind of like, geez, am I spinning my wheels? And so, and this kind of touches on a couple of the other questions that have come in about like what kinds of co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities, Or there's another question, what did you do to build an impressive application? I'd love to hear, some of the things that you did, but almost more interested in how you overcame the challenges and the obstacles to do those things, because, as I'm sure you will validate, students often kind of think that there's like some magic ticket, that you could, like, if you do this thing, you're going to get into college. Community service is always way up there on the top. So maybe kind of thinking like, and I'm trying to keep within this hour limit. I mean, literally, we could talk about a lot of the activities that Sudhanshu did for a full hour. But let's stick to basketball, because one of the questions is, what activities did you participate in high school? And also that kind of leads to, what do you do to build an impressive application? So, what I remember, and I do remember getting this letter from Sudhanshu, and I remember seeing his academics, and I was like, man, this guy must have been telling dirty jokes in his essays or something, because he's a strong student. How did he not get into any of these? But then reading your application, I saw it was mostly about your ability in basketball. And I guess some of the passion came out, but wasn't obviously basketball is played at a very high level, as you came to realize.
Are you saying I'm not very good, Prab?
I remember you actually sent me videos. You were like, look at my videos, and I was like, yeah, okay, you're pretty darn good. But yeah, maybe talk about basketball and kind of how you carried that forward in your gap year to express that passion in creative ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think basketball has always been kind of a big part of my life, because it's a sport that I started playing since I was in second grade. And I think to a fault, I'm ambitious and delusional. So when I would watch, games of, my idols playing on TV, I truly thought I would do it one day. And which is why that dream kind of lived with me. I thought one day I was going to play in the NBA, and it sounds silly to say, but when I was in 11th and 12th, I said, okay, the NBA dream is probably not happening, but I'm going to play basketball in college. And I think the biggest misconception that I had was that basketball was getting me into the best college, was going to get me into the best colleges. And the reason, as Prab said, is I wasn't very good compared to the standards in the US. And I think that's really what I learned in my first application, which is, I played at the Karnataka state level, but that doesn't mean anything when you're applying to MIT. In fact, fast forwarding, I actually tried out for the MIT team and I didn't make it twice. So it definitely doesn't mean anything. And so my gap year was really the realization that I had to think more about what were other things that I truly cared about. And basketball actually was a vehicle that kind of led me to some of those things. So I still remember Prab, just to keep it brief, Prab had given me advice that really stuck with me, which was, college admissions is not a process where someone is debating your application for like 2 or 3 days. The college admissions officers have like 5 minutes or something, and they need to summarize your application on a little post-it note. And so what you need to be thinking about is, what are the 2 or 3 things that go on that post-it note? And that's really what your entire story needs to be about. And so for me, when I thought about it, the 3 things that I wanted on my sticky note are, this guy's really passionate about basketball, but he's channeled that into technology, and he's channeled that into social impact. And those were kind of the 3 vectors that I think everything I did in my application and in my gap year focused around. And I'll give you a few examples. So the first was, in terms of technology, I ended up doing a research paper that got published in an international medical journal. So it was around lead poisoning. In terms of basketball and social impact, I organized a charity fundraiser tournament, which ended up getting a lot of the youth of the city involved. It got support from NBA India. So that was something that I was very happy and proud to do. The third is, I actually looked at some of the problems that I had as a basketball player. One of them was I had nobody to record my games for me. And so I ended up building a little camera that could follow me around as I moved around on the basketball court. So that was an example of basketball and technology. So everything that I did was really permutations and combinations of those 3 things. Think about ways in which I could combine them. Those were the things that I did.
Well, I'm going to give you a real quick question that I think you can give a real quick answer. Someone asks, is having top academics a requirement to apply to colleges like MIT?
It is not a requirement to apply. It is a requirement to get in.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Okay. Just a reminder, everyone, looking forward to your questions. Just throw them in the chat window. And in the meantime, I'll kind of go back to some of the things that I wanted to talk about with you. So you were talking about some of these activities, and we can keep dropping some more activities that you did. I think it was a really interesting story how you were able to get the research opportunity, because I remember prior to securing that, you had many rejections and a lot of people just telling you you're too young, you're a high school grad, I work with PhDs. This is something that a lot of my students encounter. And I know we talked about it back in the day, and I've certainly talked to a lot of other students about it, that the obstacles that you encounter tend to be the most interesting thing to talk about in your applications, how you creatively get through those barriers. So with that in mind, does that strike any bells with you in terms of things that you encountered during your gap year or even in high school?
Yeah, well, when I was a senior at MIT and I was going to do my master's, it was hard to get a professor to sponsor my research even then. So you can imagine how hard it was for me, fresh out of high school in a gap year in Bangalore, trying to get research. But I knew that, like I said, technology is something that I was always passionate about. And I think it comes from growing up in Bangalore. My dad always worked in a tech company. And so what I really did was I reached out to every research university Bangalore had, stalking the professors' profiles on the website, sending them emails. Sometimes I showed up in the college campus to see if I could get some time. And I think I got like 8 or 10 rejections, and it wasn't even like they considered it. It was like, why is a high school student even thinking about doing this? I think eventually I got really lucky that my mom was a doctor who had studied at St. John's, and she knew some professors and told me that they might be good people to go and try to talk to. And so one of the professors that I reached out to happened to have a project around lead poisoning where it was just at the right level of sophistication that I could understand and add value. And a lot of it had to do about, honestly, grunt work and doing work in a lab that someone of my age with a lot of energy would have been the perfect for. And so I got, honestly, very lucky that I got that opportunity. And I got very lucky that it ended up leading to a publication. But I think, stepping back to a more, meta point, the no's that I received in the gap year were honestly things that prepared me for the next 4 years, because it taught me that a no isn't personal. It's just an opportunity to craft another pitch. It's an opportunity to think more creatively about finding your solution. And I think that's something I kind of lived by throughout MIT when there were other obstacles, of course, on the way.
Awesome. Okay, we do have some good questions here. So someone asked, what were we're understanding kind of what you did to get into MIT and other really selective schools. Somebody asked, what were the kind of profiles of other Indian students that you met at MIT?
Yeah, I'd say they fall into 2 categories. They are, like I said, the ultra brilliant Olympiad winners. And like I said, I think they're like, the math Olympiad, the physics Olympiad, the astronomy Olympiad. They're like a handful of students who represent India. Of them, there are a handful of students who win gold in the world. So we're talking about someone who is the best high school student in the world at math. They get into MIT from India. That's one category of profiles. I'd say the second category of profiles are people like me and another one of my friend, Nishchal. I wouldn't say we're genius by any means. We're smart guys.
I think Nishchal would disagree.
Nishchal got a 2400, so I think he has the right to disagree. I don't. But where we succeeded, and I think where we did well, was we found more creative opportunities where we showed our leadership in terms of starting social organizations, in terms of building cool projects and products. And I think that's kind of the second profile that I've seen that has done well, which is someone who is academically smart but really excels in the extracurricular in a more holistic sense.
Yeah. This next question kind of is connected to that question, which is, according to Sudhanshu, what kind of personalities do not fit into MIT? And he says personalities. So I know it's always hard for students to try to get a sense of what the social atmosphere in a school is, or, you know, the mold, if you will, of a student. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, so in all honesty, I think every student can generally fit into most colleges. I personally believe that because colleges try to have a very diverse student group. And so chances are you'll find a couple of people like you in whichever school you end up in. So I wouldn't stress about it too much. That said, I think it's definitely true that colleges have cultures. And there's some that you might enjoy more than others. So I think the nice part about MIT is it's a culture where it's very collaborative. I've heard of stories of my friends who go to other schools where, you know, if you leave your homework out on the table, someone might, you know, rip them apart and throw them in the trash. That would be like unthinkable at MIT. At MIT, you always work with people on projects because it's so hard. You are in it together to survive. So I think the people who thrive the best are people who are, you know, a little nerdy in that they like technology. You're not going to find anyone who's studying English at MIT. They're people who like to be collaborative. And I think it attracts a lot of people who don't want to succeed in a more traditional sense. I think, you know, not to take names, but if you end up at Wharton at Penn, you know, chances are you're going to go into investment banking and consulting, and, you know, that's your thing. And I think at MIT you meet a little bit more of, you know, the rule breakers who, you know, love, you know, hacking around and building something new.
Awesome, awesome. Somebody else asked that it was mentioned that you're also interested in business. How did you incorporate that into your undergraduate years?
Yeah, so I guess context on why I'm interested in business. I've always aspired to found my own company one day. And I think as the years have passed on, it sounds more and more cliche to say. It isn't as unique as it was when I was 5 years, or when I was like 5 or 10 years old. Everyone wants to start a company now. I think that's kind of why I was always interested in technology and business. In fact, the colleges that I was debating between was MIT and UPenn, because UPenn had this program called, you know, Management and Technology, which is exactly what I wanted to do. The way I incorporated it is partly through my coursework. So I studied computer science, but when you go to college in the US, you aren't just studying your major. You tend to have requirements in, you know, the broader liberal arts. So I took some classes in econ, some classes in MIT's business school. The second way I did it was I was involved. Like I said, I'm never someone who would call myself, you know, a very book smart, like class focused person. I always enjoyed the extracurriculars. So I joined MIT's largest business club. Through that business club, we participated in business competitions, entrepreneurship pitch competitions. So I pitched to one of the founders of PayPal. I invited speakers like the founder of the Princeton Review to come on campus. And also lastly, through internships. So I interned at McKinsey Company as well as Bank of America. So I'd say those were really three ways where outside my coursework, my extracurricular was about dabbling with the world of business.
Cool, and that seems a good segue into talking about what advice would you have for a student on, you know, A, getting involved in other areas in college, and B, balancing your academics with all the other things that you do in college?
Yeah, I think when I came into college, I cared a lot about doing well academically. And I think that the reason is, I think growing up in India, you're told that academics are important. I think it's something that are kind of drilled into your brains. I think, like I said, because of my injury in high school, I missed a bunch of school. In the whole of my gap year, I was focused more on projects. I did, you know, maybe a little bit of online courses, but not really. So college for me was, I wanted to prove myself that if I'm going to MIT, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do well academically. So which is why academics was a focus for me. But that said, I think the best advice that I got was in college, pick two extracurriculars outside academics that you're passionate about, and spend all your time just doing those two things and going deep. And so the way you do that is, freshman year, you come on campus, you're starry-eyed, join whatever sounds interesting. But as time passes, figure out what are the things where you want to focus your time, where it's most rewarding for you, and pick just two things. Because with classes, with clubs, and then with sleep, and then there's this thing called social life, you're not going to be left with much time beyond that. So that's really what I'd recommend. And I think now that I've graduated college, I have perspective, which is that everything you learn in college, you forget. And so college isn't even about the classes. Like, yes, your GPA and your classes help you get jobs. Today, the value I get from MIT was all the people that I met. And I think the compass that I would guide my decisions towards are what are the activities and what are the majors and what are the things that I could do where I could meet the kinds of people I want to, because those are the relationships that will live with you beyond college.
Excellent. So this question is, what drove you to take up so many diverse jobs, each different from the other, and how did you manage them? I guess maybe you could also incorporate that answer into advice you have about getting internships or, applying for jobs, however you want to go with that.
Right. So in case, I guess people may not know, I did very, very different kinds of internships. One was software engineering internships at the New York Times and at Uber. I did a finance internship at Bank of America, and I did a consulting internship at McKinsey. And finally, after graduating, I ended up joining Uber as a product manager, which kind of falls right at the intersection of technology and business. So I don't think it's a very normal thing for people to be that all over the place in terms of things that they try. But I think for me, like I said, I always knew that the world of business is something that I found exciting. But when you're in India, you're almost taught that business is what the dumb kids do. And so I remember in high school, if you didn't have a good grade, then you would be asked to study commerce. The rest of the students would study science. But I think in the U.S. that's not the case. I think a lot of bright students also go into the more businessy professions. So I think I have a philosophy in life, which is if you figured out your life's goal at age 5, amazing. You're way ahead of everyone. Do your thing. But the worst thing you can do is not know what you really want and then just pick one thing and go super deep. Because then one day when you're maybe 35, you're going to wake up and ask yourself why you're even doing this. So my perspective was, hey, I'm just a kid who grew up in Bangalore. I don't know anything about opportunities in the US. Let me be very intentional about doing different kinds of internships. That way I both learn what I like, but I also learn what I don't like. And I think that's really what the benefit of doing these different internships was, because today I have a lot of confidence in saying that, I want to be in tech and I want to do something in entrepreneurship. In terms of advice, is that, I guess, the next question I should answer?
Yeah, well, there was one that said, what advice would you have for a computer science student? And I'm sure that, that's a broad question, but I guess is there anything that pops off the top of your head? I mean, I know the environment of computer science right now broadly in the US is that it's just ridiculously popular. It's very difficult to get into computer science as a major as a freshman, and I know it's also difficult to transfer into it. But is there any advice you would have, say, to a high school student who wants to go into that area? And also maybe you could say, is there, any advice you'd have as an undergraduate if you're a computer science student?
Yeah, so I think one of the big reasons to study abroad is really that you can choose your major rather than your major, rather than your college rank and your college score determining your major. For example, in IIT, only the best of the best get to study computer science, and everyone else has to study like chemical engineering and learn coding on the side and then get computer science jobs. So it's a little crazy in that way. So I think the best part about the US is if you want to study computer science, generally, depending on which college you go, you can. In terms of a couple of pieces of advice, I'd say, firstly, as an Indian student, you want to study a STEM major ideally, because then you have 3 years to work in the US. Whereas if you study something like liberal arts, like English, you only have 1. So again, think it's a bit of a tactical professional advice, but you're better off studying something in the hard sciences, because even if you have other interests, you can do those on the side on your own. For computer science specifically, I think it's today one of the hottest times to be a computer science major. I remember at MIT career fairs, employers would literally walk around with boards saying, "Are you a computer science major? If so, please come here." So it's kind of crazy in that way. But I think it's one of those, like, you shouldn't study any subject because you think it's going to lead you to a good job. If you aren't passionate about it, you won't do well. The way you test how passionate you are about it is, computer science is something where you can get your hands dirty. You can work on projects by yourself. So I would just encourage you to work on a bunch of projects. That's the most fun way to learn how to code. I've actually, in my gap year, I bought a book that was this thick to learn how to code in Java. And till this day, the most use I got out of it was as a stand for one of my monitors, which wasn't high enough. The only way I learned how to code was I said, hey, this app that would solve this personal problem of mine, for example, the basketball tracking, that sounds fun to build. Let me take the right YouTube courses and whatever to get there. So just build side projects is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think, that's great advice for a high school student is, I always get the question about how is there an advantage to taking Coursera and edX? I say, well, you're not going to get credit for it in the admissions process because they have no idea whether you did it. But if you can do those courses and then apply what you learned to something, that's going to have a big impact. This question is, if UPenn and the Jerome, Fischer, M&T program was such an apt course and you wanted to pursue it, why did you pick MIT in the end? And what most of the people on this call also don't know is that you also got a full scholarship at Georgia Tech. So tell us why you picked MIT.
Honestly, it was a really difficult decision.
I thought it was because you wanted to get on the basketball team and you figured they were all nerds. No,
yeah, so I actually had a chance to visit colleges. So the way it works is you get your acceptances sometime in March, and you have the month of April to attend a bunch of admitted students days. So my dad and I actually flew to the US to visit some colleges. And I'll be honest, UPenn seemed a lot more fun than MIT. And it was kind of tearing me on the inside, where on one hand, MIT was kind of like a dream college that I'd always thought about, whereas UPenn, like you said, it seemed like, the perfect course for me. It seemed like I'd have more fun. But I think what I convinced myself and I realized was, if I truly wanted to be a technology entrepreneur, what matters most is having really good technical skills and being around people who are really passionate about entrepreneurship and technology. And I saw that in general, the people who ended up at UPenn were more interested in traditional business like private equity and investment banking. So when I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be around, and when I thought about what skill I wanted to focus on first, I decided I wanted to focus more on computer science. Second, like I said, I'm not a person who really enjoys taking that many courses. In UPenn, it was a double degree. And so I would have had to take something like 6 or 7 courses every semester, whereas at MIT, I only had to do 4 or 5. So I think those are kind of the 2 reasons that it came down to. And when I think like Jeff Bezos has this philosophy in life, which is, regret minimization. I thought, when I was going to be 50, I was going to regret not going to MIT. So I minimized regret a little bit. And I'll be honest, it was really tough. It's better to be from MIT than at MIT, but I'm glad I chose to do it.
Great. Yeah, I think connected to that, I remember when you were in your 4th year and you called me and I was all excited because my retirement plan is when you start your company and invite me to family, friends, and share common shares. But you were applying to grad school and I was like, oh man. Tell us about that decision and also those unique programs that you applied to, because I think a lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, so during my senior year, I applied to Harvard Business School and Stanford Business School for their early acceptance programs. So these are really programs for students in college to get an early ticket and an early admission to business school. And the idea is they'll spend a couple of years working. Your offer is kind of there waiting for you. And you can attend a couple of years later. So at HBS, the program is called the 2+2 program, which is you can actually defer your offer between 2 to 4 years and still join business school. The reason I applied was really that, as I said, I'm drawn now to the world of entrepreneurship and technology investing more broadly. And I think for both of those, I felt that if I ever needed a time to reset, think about a different career path, or maybe just have a fun time, business schools promises to be all those things. So it isn't something that I'm certain about going to right now. It was more like a free option if you will, in finance, which is put in a little bit of effort and you get it. And I still have the option of deciding whether I want to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and his modesty continues. He got into both of those programs. All right, here's a question. What's the difference that you may have observed between a degree in engineering and one in science, specifically physics? How difficult is it to switch between the two?
I frankly don't know much about actually doing a major outside an engineering major. What I have seen, like I said, is one, computer science is one of those things where you can honestly learn it on your own. And that's what you're really evaluated on, which is, I know physics majors from MIT who joined like a Google or a Facebook. So if you put in the effort, I don't think your major limits your job. That said, Prab probably knows better. I know colleges either allow you to switch majors very freely, or some colleges have like GPA cutoffs that you need to meet in order to switch majors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And also some colleges, some of their majors are very impacted with too many students. So it can almost be a lottery, even if you have the GPA. So it's kind of a college by college thing. All right, so someone asked, for someone who might not be a top scorer in high school, what would you suggest would be a good way to make up for your academics on the college application?
Right, maybe I'll start with sharing what my academics were.
No, yeah, I guess maybe like, I mean, I would say, is it correct to assume that you really didn't meet too many students at MIT that weren't incredibly bright in high school, or exactly. Hardworking?
Yeah, you need good test scores. I think the way you think about it is good test scores is the minimum, and then everything else you do on top of that gives you a shot. So which is why if you're asking the question, are your scores good enough? It's going to be challenging to get into the very best schools. But I think something I was told that I kind of believe in is, the slope of colleges in India is kind of like this. The best ones are much better than the worst ones. In the US, it's something like this, which is you can get a great education even if you aren't at the very best college. That's
such good advice. And it's true. I mean, I think, when you talk about the IITs and NITs in India, those are a great platform for a professor to teach at for some years and then, go off into industry. But, when you look at that, I hate the term tiers, second tier and all, but those universities in India may not pay the professors that great, and it isn't as much of a platform. But in the US, as you said, I've never heard that about the slope, but that's a really great way to put it. And there are tremendous opportunities. I think something we always talk about is that at MIT it's probably not as important to graduate at the very top of your class. There are going to be some opportunities for everyone who survives MIT. But at other colleges where it might not have the same kind of reputation as MIT, it's more important that you graduate in the top of your class, but there'll still be some great opportunities. And are there any examples, maybe through your friends that you went to high school, that you might share about students who didn't go to as big a name as MIT and what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if your future isn't determined by college. In fact, I'm 2 years out of college and I'm still learning what the real world is about. And I've seen already that people, regardless of how selective their college was, end up getting great jobs and doing great things. Uh, of course, if you go to a college that maybe is a little lower on the rankings, the way you make up for it is being the very best there. And I know, for example, some of my friends who, one of them went to Georgia Tech, which is so great, but they ended up at the top of their class. They're now at Stanford doing their masters. They've gotten offers from Google, Facebook, Microsoft. And so I would think that, life, success, whatever that means to you, is a longer term path. And no matter which college you go to, as long as, they fall within a certain range, you're going to have so many great opportunities that it's really the ball's in your court to make the most of it.
Excellent. And I got another private chat from someone who looks like he's looking for grad school. So just asking about the difference you experienced in the grad school. And I guess this is good for all the students looking at undergrad as well, just to be aware of it in the future. What's the difference between the applications that you did for undergrad and for grad school, and any advice related to preparing for the graduate applications?
Yeah, so frankly, I don't know too much about graduate admissions. The reason I got into MIT's program for computer science for my master's is because there's a very straightforward program at MIT. MIT students who meet a GPA cutoff and can find a professor to sponsor their research automatically get admitted. So honestly, like, the application for me was doing my classes.
Well, how about for the Stanford and Harvard? And you had to do a lot of essays and recommendations and stuff.
Yes, so I can talk about MBAs. If you're applying for an MBA program out of college, the things they care about are, one, your scores. Like, nothing really changes from high school. People expect good scores. Two, I think what's different is expectations change around your extracurriculars. Now, your extracurriculars are the internships that you do, and there are some internships that are more exclusive than others, and those things help. And the bar for the projects you do is also a little higher, because now you're in college with all these smart students and amazing professors. So in some ways, it's very similar. I honestly felt the application was easier for the MBA because I think in college there's a bit of a pressure that I felt in my essays that I had to be really profound. There were all these essays where I had to find some tiny thing in my life, and that's the answer that explains everything about me. I think, for example, in HBS's essay, it was literally like, tell us what you wanted us to know. And so it was a very straightforward essay, which is, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is what I want to do.
Awesome. But
I think one thing I didn't touch on was recommendations. So maybe we could talk about that as well.
No, you go for it.
Okay, yeah. So letters of recommendations are very, very important. And something that I did better in college that I didn't do in high school was developing and cultivating early relationships with my teachers. So I think in school, my relationship with my teachers was I take their classes, do well in their tests. Whereas in college, I always knew that I might apply to grad schools, which is why I worked closely with a few professors. For example, Bengt Holmstrom is a Nobel laureate professor from MIT. And I was lucky enough to take his class. There was a bit of a lottery. And through that class, I ended up working on a project with him outside my class, which was about how ride-sharing drivers get paid. And he was one of my letters of references for my business school application. And so, coming into MIT, I never thought a Nobel laureate would write me a letter of recommendation. But just being intentional about working on projects with professors you find interesting and care about can be a very effective way. And the way you get good letters of recommendation aren't, just, telling your professor at the very last minute, hey, I need this thing. You need to tell them fairly early that you're planning to apply. And ideally, you create them a little document with just bullets of points that they should be aware of. You never want to write your own recommendation, but you do want to make your professor's job a little easier. And so that's really what I'd recommend, which is cultivate early relationships and make it very easy for your professors to help you.
Awesome. Yeah, so that kind of struck me when you were talking about, the essays and the differences between grad school and undergrad admissions. I know it's been a while since you did the undergrad essays, but what do you remember about thinking about, how to make these personal and yet also kind of highlight some of your achievements, but doing that in a subtle way so you don't look too braggadocious. I know these are all the challenges that students typically have. What do you remember about that process, and what advice would you have for students?
Yeah, so I'll tell you guys about just what my essay was about on the Common App. So the way the essay started was that sometimes I'd leave a coin on a bus seat to kind of observe how people react and who ends up taking the coin. And the whole story revolved around how I actually always took public transportation, and I lost so many things. My backpack, my phones would get stolen, my wallet would get stolen, and so I really wanted to understand like how thefts happen in buses. And that's really how I built, my first ever product, which was, building like a mini lock for my bag. And that's really what led me to making, better products and bigger products. And a lot of that is what I did in my gap year. So that's kind of what my essay was about. The process that I went through, honestly, was cycling through a lot of bad ideas to get there. I remember there was one essay that I'd written about how when I get nervous, sometimes I need to use the restroom, and how that's a recurring pattern of my life. And I remember sending that to Prab, and he's like, really, like that's the best thing you have to talk about? But I think it's awesome that I had Prab as this open collaborator that I could throw ideas at. And Prab was amazing in helping me understand that these ones look promising, like go a little deeper here. So to do a process where you get to explore a lot and then have many revisions for the essay you actually do, the only secret is starting early and being able to have a very mediocre first draft, but something where you put pen to paper. And I think a couple of principles for essays are you don't want it to be a recap of your resume. People love stories. The reason these essays exist is colleges want to know who is this person, how will they fit into this class, and your goal is really ideally to convey something about who you are, and hopefully in subtle ways brag about some of the things that you've done. And in my case, it was the subtle things were that, hey, from a young age I've been independent, traveling in India's public transportation. I think about problems and I build these solutions. I mean, so they took away that I'm this entrepreneurial person, but that way I could speak about some of the projects that I actually did. So I think that the cliche is show, don't tell.
Awesome. Well, let's see, there was one more question here, just shouldn't take you too much time to answer, is how difficult is the coursework at MIT?
It was difficult for me. Difficult means a lot of different things, because there are some students who have been coding since age 5, and MIT was difficult for them because they came in and took all graduate level classes. Then there were people like me who'd only coded a little bit, but I challenged myself to not only finish my undergraduate early, but also do my master's. So just in terms of the difficulty of the courses, like learning difficult concepts as well as time, it was challenging for me, and I don't think I've worked as hard like ever in my life. I've been working for the past 2 years, and that's been a breeze compared to college.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I know I've got a couple of my other colleagues who work with me and work with students here, Geeta, Deepa, and Payal. Just with the remaining time we have left, just wanted to see if any of you had any question. You can just pop on, turn on your microphone, turn on your video if you have any question. Otherwise, I do want to be respectful of Sudhanshu and everybody else who's participating here's time.
I got one, I guess, private questions. Maybe I can just share that for the group.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So I guess there's someone in this call who is playing basketball for the Karnataka state team as well. What do you think I should add to my application to have a good shot at getting into the top colleges in the US? Since I've played basketball competitively, I haven't really pursued other extracurriculars. Do you think that might affect my applications? Unfortunately, I think it does if you haven't done other things, because playing state basketball in India doesn't mean anything, unfortunately, and it pains me to say that. If you've played for India, that's something, but it's still not going to get you into Harvard as a guarantee. What I would encourage you to do is do the same thing that I did, which is think about basketball as kind of a vehicle for you to bring some of your other ideas and things to reality. And I think, like the blunt advice that I would give is for you to get into exceptional colleges, you need to do exceptional things. So invest your time in places where you can be exceptional. Not everyone can build an app and a product that solves a problem in their lives and makes a difference. For me, that was a competitive advantage than thinking I could play for the NBA. So I think you really need to introspect and know what are areas that you're good at. And like I said, I did a fundraiser basketball tournament. I worked on a tracker for my basketball games. Just get creative on how you can use your passions to show those strengths.
Awesome. Deepa, I saw you pop on for a second.
Yeah, no, I just want to say hello to Sudhanshu.
Hi, Andy.
Nice to see you. And great talk. This was a great conversation. I'm glad you've recorded it, Prab, because I see many of my students who should have been here aren't. So
yeah, we recorded.
I'm going to pass on the recording to them.
Excellent. Excellent.
Great words of wisdom, Sudhanshu. Nice to see you.
Awesome. Well, I absolutely. Oh, sorry, Geeta, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, Sudhanshu, it was a great chat. It was great listening to you. And Prab, Dave is also here, actually.
Hi, Dave.
Yeah. So for just one question, if you have a minute. As of now, what career you might be thinking of?
Yeah, so I think my goal now is in the next, say 10 years, I'd love to found my own startup. But as people say, saying you want to be a founder is kind of like saying you want to be rich. It really needs to be rooted in some problem that you care about. And so areas that I find really exciting are really ride sharing, self-driving, and the world, where the world is moving in terms of autonomous technology. So that's really kind of the space that I'm interested in. And I might either join early stage companies or start early stage companies, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to be doing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. Wow. Well, we finished up at exactly an hour. Love it. And I always enjoy talking to you, Sudhanshu. And, now I think you got a whole bunch more fans. So please do stay in touch and let us know as success breeds success. We'll certainly keep following you.
Awesome. Prab, thank you for having me. And guys, I hope that was helpful. Yeah, I think to end, if there's one thing I would say, it's just don't be afraid to pick an ambitious goal, but know what it takes to get there. Plan early and get creative on how you can get there. And
have your
people
safety.
Like Prab are the perfect people to ask you for advice.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you everyone who's participated. Bye.
Awesome. See you guys.